Create in me a pure heart, O my God, and renew a tranquil conscience within me, O my hope. Through the spirit of power, confirm thou me in thy cause, O my best beloved, and by the light of thy glory, reveal unto me thy path, O thou the goal of my desire. Through the power of thy transcendent might, lift me up unto the heaven of thy holies, O source of my being. And by the breezes of thine eternity, gladden me, O thou who art my God. Let thine everlasting melodies breathe tranquility on me, O my companion, and let the riches of thine ancient countenance deliver me from all except thee, O my master. And let the tidings of the revelation of thine incorruptible essence bring me joy, O thou who art the most manifest of the manifest and the most hidden of the hidden. Baha'u'llah.
Thank you so much. Friends, tonight we have an amazing scholar, Dr. Stephen Lambden. And before I allow him to talk and for you all to not hear me anymore, I just want to make mention, Adib Taherzadeh has said that the goal of every Baha'i should be to be addicted. We have to get to a point that we become addicted to the writings of Baha'u'llah. And this, my friends, is exactly what Dr. Stephen Lambden does. And we're blessed by it because we become, you know, the seed that's about to become watered. So bask in that. And tonight it's going to be a talk on the tablet of the Bab to Muhammad Ali Quddús. So whenever you're ready, Dr. Stephen Lambden, please.
Thank you, Nida. Thank you so much. I feel I've probably let Mr. Taherzadeh down already because I'm talking about the Bab, not about Baha'u'llah, but we'll see before long that the difference is not anything to be over worried about in terms of the unity of not only the Bab and Baha'u'llah, but the Bab with his major important disciples. The subject of this talk is centering on, as you probably know already, one of the tablets of the Bab addressed to Quddús, which is at the beginning of the Dawnbreakers, and it's a very short tablet. It's just about, you can read the whole thing in Arabic or a translation in English in just a few minutes or a few moments, in fact. And the text says that the facsimile texts in the handwriting of the Bab are a little difficult to read, and trying to magnify the color images sufficiently so that you can read it is rather difficult. But more than 10 years ago, Mr. Mohammed Afnan, who worked at the Baha'i World Center for many years, was kind enough to give me his version of the text of these tablets with the irab, or the vowel pointings, in his own hand. And I didn't ask him for this, he just suddenly came and said, would you like to have these? I said, well, that would be wonderful, thank you so much. And they were in my UK home for ages, and I think I'd scanned them or done something with them. Anyway, they somehow got lost for quite a long period of time. And I wanted to rediscover these texts in his handwriting and any others I could find, and despaired after a long period of looking, because in this house and in the UK house, hundreds and hundreds of books and thousands of papers, I could hardly, easily find anything. But just by chance, about a few weeks ago, I managed to find at the bottom of a PDF, which wasn't properly labeled, these texts. And the papers themselves are still somewhat lost, but I'm happy to have those texts. And this morning, just after a non-existent breakfast, I read them through from beginning to end, just to see what was in the other tablets that might throw a bearing upon the one I'm going to speak about today. And incorporating some of that data has taken me most of the day. So some of my PowerPoint presentations are a little bit disorganized, among other things in this household. So I'll do my best to be reasonably consistent about presenting something in some sort of order, but forgive me if I fail, as I probably will. So Shola, can you enable me to share the screen? Good. I presume everybody can see that clearly enough. So the talk today centers on Quddús, particularly a tablet of the Bab, which the Bab wrote to him. And I'll just in passing say now, the exact dating of the Bab's revelation or writing of this text is a little bit uncertain, both from the point of view of the nature of the text itself and its language, and the style that the Bab adopted at different points during the 6 or 7 lunar years of his life and his prophetic mission. So we'll come back to that later, and we can start just by reminding ourselves that on the left is the facsimile of the tablet itself, and on the right the dawn breakers, where you find 20 or so color facsimiles of the tablets of the Bab to the letters of the living. And they range between pages 22 and 23, just before the introduction into the Dawnbreakers. And probably most people will take a glance at it and be amazed at the nature of these texts, but it'll be a little bit difficult, even if you know Persian and or Arabic quite well, to read them. It's not an easy task, as we'll see. So anyway, that's where they are, and that's the text, or certain writings out of these texts, partly my own work, partly other people's work, as I mentioned, especially pay tribute to Muhammad Afnan, who sadly passed away about 4 years ago in Canada. So thanks to him. The letters of the living, a few words about this to begin with. These are the names of the letters of the living. The first one, of course, being really well known, Mullah Hussein Bushrui. And the first 3 of the letters of the living were all from Bushrui. But also it's the case that all of the ones completely marked in red there were martyred in the Mazandaran upheaval at Sheikh Tarbarism. So those are the 19 letters of the living. They, along with the Bab himself, constitute the first Vahid of the pleroma or full spiritual fullness of the religion of the Bab, as it's actualized within a group of people representative of the divinity for the era of the Bab's dispensation. So the first Vahid, the abjad numerical value of this word, Va long A, he, adds up to exactly 19. So 18 letters of living plus the Bab makes 19. Hence they're called the Vahid, Vahid. And as you already know, there's a very famous hadith, which is in red at the bottom here, attributed to Imam Ali. I am the point, which is beneath the letter B. And the Bab repeated this claim of Imam Ali many, many times in his writings. And this is the point beneath the letter, this is the letter B in white in the title section here. And from the dot of this point, everything is supposed to have originated. So like in the beginning was the word, Babis and Baha'is can say in the beginning was the letter B, or the point of the letter B. And from that point, letters of the alphabet originate. So letters of the alphabet are basically a moving point, and that point moves in various shapes and ways and configures the letters of the alphabet. which we'll now, in a few moments, have a look at. The letters of the alphabet, 27, 28 of them, include this letter, this word, hey, which means living, or as an attribute of God, the living one. And it's composed of two Arabic letters. As you can see, I've written it an H. That H should have a dot under it. We call that the hard H, and the other H, which is in the greatest name, the word Baha, is a softer one. And if you add those two letters together, according to their numerical values, you reach 10 plus 8 equals 18. So the 18 letters of the living, the huruf al-hay, are called that on one level because the word hay, not the word huruf al, just the word hay, is 10 plus 8, which equals 18. They are the components of that particular word. That word, al-hay, occurs in the Quran a number of times. Not that frequently, but especially important is this phrase here, La ilaha illa huwa al-hay al-qayyum. There's no God except him, the living one, the self-subsisting. And you've heard that phrase hundreds of times, I'm sure, within Baha'i prayers, because in the Quran, those two attributes of God occur adjacent to each other in several verses, important verses of the Quran, and some of them are listed below there. So Al-Hayy, Al-Qayyum, the living one, the self-subsisting. The Bab gave such an importance to the word Hayy, meaning the living. He even named one of the chapters of his first book, the Qayyim al-Asma, the Surah of the Living One. And so that's quite an interesting thing. I'm just going to say a few introductory things about those tablets in the beginning of the Dawn Breakers, one of which, the 18th, as you can see from this PowerPoint slide, is addressed specifically to Quddús, the 18th letter of the living. And he came from a Shi'i religious background. In other words, he gave allegiance to the spiritual insight and guidance fostered and forwarded by the founder of this important Shi'i movement, Sheikh Ahmad al-Asai, who died in 1926. His successor was Sayyid Kazem Rushdie, who died at the very end of 1843 and the very beginning of 1844. And so Quddús was in touch with people who were Sheikhs. And for most of his young life and early adulthood, he was studying, training to be a cleric, a mullah, or more than that, mujtahid, with people who were especially learned about matters channeled through Sheikh Ahmad al-Asai and his successor, Sayyid Kazem. Like most of the other letters of the living, they came from this Sheikhi religious background. And Quddús was apparently one of the most important and favorite and learned disciples of Sayyid Kazem Rushdie, with whom he spent 3 or 4 years of his early days before he became a follower of the Bab with Sayyid Kazem. We don't know whether he met the Bab during that time, because the Bab spent 9 months to a year or so with studying under Sayyid Kazem and doing other things in Iraq around in the early 1840s. So this tablet of the Bab to Quddús is wholly in Arabic. It has a prescript, which we'll come to in a few moments, the Basmalah, which is the word for the phrase Bismillah al-Rahman al-Rahim, or a new version of that invented by the Bab and put in front of many of his tablets, like the tablets of Baha'u'llah too, it then has, loosely speaking, 7 or so paragraphs where I divided it into those paragraphs. The original doesn't do that, but I did that, and there are a few sentences in each of these sections. And it revolves around, in a way, the Bab's claim to divinity and the liqa Allah, or the encounter or meeting with the divinity, with God, actualized through the Bab himself, and, as we'll see, through his foremost disciple, the mirror of his reality, this young Persian entitled Quddús. So Quddús kind of mirrors the being of the Bab. The Bab and Quddús were both expressions of the magnitude of the deity. The Bab as a manifestation of God, and Quddús as somebody who was intimately associated with the Bab, to the degree that, for example, when he became a follower, if you remember from the Dawnbreakers, which everybody has read, he asked Mullah Hussein a question, and then he said, I can recognize him by his gait. Now, he recognized the gait, al-Bab, by his G-A-I-T, which in English means his manner of walking. So it's incredible that Quddús was able to come to faith just by seeing the Bab walking, presumably not too far away from where he was. So both of them, the Bab and Quddús and the Bab, were Sayyids. That's a descendant of the Prophet Muhammad, and through various others of his descendants, including the Shi'i 12 Imams. So the Bab was a doubly Husseinid Sayyid from both his father and his mother, descended from Imam Hussein, who was the most famous martyr in the history of Shiite Islam. And Quddús was a descendant of his younger brother, Imam Hassan. And so Imam Hassan was the second Imam after his father, Imam Ali, and the third of them was Imam Hussein. So Quddús and the Bab were Sayyids from those sons of Imam Ali, Hassan and Hussein, who were Imams 2 and 3. Now the title Quddús is one of my favorite words, a word which it's easy to become fascinated with. And probably I'll express that fascination by going into too much detail about aspects of this word and its history, Islamic and pre-Islamic. Suffice to say that the title given by the Quddús, the title Quddús given to Quddús, to Muhammad Ali Barfurushi, is a really, really significant word in the history of religion. It's in some senses the most sublime of all of the Arabic words in religious history. And I'll try to prove that from its pre-Islamic origins and something of its Islamic history too. And so letters 17 and 18, amongst those 19 we spoke about, 17 is Tahireh, Fatima Baragani, Qurrat al-Ain, whose name or title Tahireh has to do with supreme purity. And the word Quddús has these connotations too. And so 17 and 18 had titles which are particularly close to each other. And we'll see later how these aspects might come together. I wanted to give you a taste, though I didn't have time to write out the translation properly, but in one of the latest books of the Bab, called the Book of the 5 Grades, or Modes of His Revelation, the Bab writes this: glorified be thee, whomsoever I say should say, you are Quddús, then you indeed are Muqaddas al-Aqdas. In other words, if somebody made that claim to be Quddús, then such a claim in the sight of God would be such that they would be Muqaddas, which means sanctified, holy, sacred. So the Bible in Islam is called Kitab al-Muqaddas, the holy book. So that's the word Muqaddas there. And here you have a verbal noun formed from the same root as Quddús, which we'll go into later, al-Aqdas. And so this couple of lines, so praise be unto thee, O my God, whomso should say you are Quddús, you can understand that to mean God or somebody else, then that would indeed be a real claim relative to sanctity and supreme holiness. So we even get a taste here in these lines of the importance that the Bab gave to this particular title or word. Now, in Arabic, every letter has a numerical value, and this is called the abjad system. It's called abjad because people made a rhyme from it. Abjad, Hawaz, Huti, Kalaman, Safas, doing all of the numbers right up to 1,000. And the first two are A, B, J, D. And that's why it's called abjad. And you can see that it has ancient roots whereby a similar name for Hebrew and Syriac and Greek and Arabic, A, B, G, D, or A, B, J, D, all of those languages which gave birth to many others, including English, including Persian, indirectly through Arabic. So this abjad system is an important and interesting thing and has very ancient roots. I suggest that you might like to read the article on this subject in Encyclopedia Iranica. I think this passage here is where some of this material came from. The Bab was a master of the mysteries of the abjad system and its relationship to letters and names, especially theological concepts. And many of his writings are infused or diffused with subtle, deep modes of thinking about the relationship between the numerical value of letters and names and equivalences in that respect and theological connotations that relate from those two things. I wanted to include this slide to pay tribute to Houshmand Khan, a very brilliant translator and devoted person who wrote this book, which you see here, which is about the life and writings of Quddús. And it's a brilliant book of 315 pages long. It's in Persian and Arabic. And everybody with a decent library should have a copy of that book and spend the next 10 years trying to unravel it and make sense of it. So one of the versions of the text from the handwriting of the Bab in the Dawnbreakers is included in this book on page 8. Now, this is the handwriting of the Bab here, and this is the text within that book based upon the handwriting of the Bab. Now, this slightly enlarged version of the prescript, which we spoke about earlier, begins this letter of the Bab to Quddús. He's not here called a letter of the living, and that doesn't actually occur in any of those tablets addressed in the beginning of the Dawnbreakers to the people we know as the letters of the living. The names are not always there, except in the case of the Quddús one, it is, unlike a good many of the others, including the Tahire one. Tahire's name is not explicitly there. And here, if you can see how quite hard it is to read the Bab's handwriting here. Here you have the word Hazar, and then the word meh, this is what we sent down unto the Heikal Athamin. In other words, this is what we revealed unto the temple, the 8th temple, 8 before 10, which is the Arabic way of saying 18. So this is how the prescript of that tablet is this. And some of the other words here are really quite hard to read unless, like Muhammad Afnan and people like that, you already have integrated within your consciousness some fairly profound and detailed knowledge of the vocabulary and style of the Bab. So the Nazalna here, we sent it down, is just this little block here. There's no dots anywhere for the letters of the alphabet here. So it's not an easy read. That's just another version of that. So the prescript says this letter or tablet of Quddús is apparently as a letter of the living, opens with the standard in Baha'i and other writings, huwa. It has that there, the word huwa. When you listen to Persians saying prayers, you'll often hear huwa. The wa is changed into a v, huwa, of Allah. And that occurs at the beginning of this tablet to the 18th letter. And if we go back to the text here, so the Bab says, this is what we sent down unto the Heikal, the temple. Now that word is originally Sumerian, 5,000 years old, and it's pronounced like this in Sumerian, Igal. Through the Semitic languages, Hekel, Hebrew, Arabic, Heikal, has a very ancient history. So that word also, Heikal, occurs most famously in the Hadith al-Haqiqah, or 5 or 6 utterances of Imam Ali to Kumail ibn Ziyad an-Nakhai, was an early Shi'i Muslim figure, who asked him about al-Haqiqah, reality. And among the replies is one which mentions the shimmering forth of forces through the Heikal. And so that's the roots of that word. You could go into endless details about that. The tablets of the Bab and Baha'u'llah, which have to do with that in tremendous and interesting detail. So the Bab says, this is what we sent down unto the temple, the Heikal, the 8th one, before the 10, in other words, the 18th. So bear witness that he is Al-Aziz Al-Marhub. Now, Al-Aziz is a word which every Persian knows very, very well. Aziz means mighty, comes to mean dear and friendly. And so the 18th letter of a living is, or God himself, or the Bab are described here as Aziz. Now, Aziz means mighty or almighty or noble, but the word Marhub is more interesting in the sense that this, if that is the right reading of this Arabic text here, which is a little bit, to use a bad way of putting it, difficult to unpack. It wouldn't have to be Marhub, because many of the other tablets have here Mahbub. And this is the, not like Mahbub, but this is Marhub. And there are various versions of the unpacking of this prescript in the tablet of the Bab, which understand a different spelling there. But I think Marhub is probably the right reading there for a number of reasons. Was the word Marhub something which was theologically significant to the Bab and to Quddús. And the answer is that marhub grammatically means something like awesome, God, a manifestation of God-fearingness, possibly asceticism or even monasticism, because the Arabic word for monasticism is based on this root, this very root. And it occurs in the Quran, the root RHB, from whence this term comes, quite a number of times, not a lot of times, but a number. So in Arabic, the word rahib or rahab means monk. And so this could be understood to be particularly significant for the person of Quddús, because Quddús, if we read the biographies and allusions in the writings of the Bab, would seem to have been a deeply contemplative, quiet, kind of monastic soul of unbelievable spiritual power. So not only did Quddús recognize the Bab just by seeing the nature of his walking, that was the level of his spiritual insight, but the Bab chose Quddús to go with him on his pilgrimage, 1844-5, to Mecca. It wasn't Mullah Hussein, it wasn't Tahirih, who was living elsewhere at that time anyway, but the last of the letters of the living, who became a follower a bit after all of the others, maybe 30 or 40 days later. He was the one whom the Bab took to be with him in Mecca and Medina, along with his Ethiopian servant. So Quddús we can understand from marhub, if we apply that to him, is indicating that he was a person of supreme piety and spirituality. I'm not going to go into many historical details, but just to remind you of a few things before we go on to these Quddús issues, theological issues. Muhammad Ali, and that was his parentally bestowed name, Ba Farushi Quddús, was born around 1822 and died in the 16th of May, 1849. We more or less know that fairly precisely. Now, Ba Farush is a market town, originally having a kind of Zarathushtri, Zoroastrian name, Mah Mitr, Great Mitra or Mithra. Since 1939, the time of Reza Shah Pahlavi, was renamed Babur, which means having a lot of water, and is now the capital city of Babul County in the northern province of Mazandaran, a province you will all have heard of before, because this is where the family of Baha'u'llah came from. And it's about 20 kilometers from the south of the Caspian Sea and not too far from the Alborz Mountains, situated northeast of Tehran. Just to please Shola, I thought I'd add here that the ruins of the 5th Safavid Shah Abbas, his palace, are located in Babul Bafarush. So now you can see from this diagram where it is, how close it is to the Caspian Sea there, in the province of Mazandaran. This is a mosque in Bafarush to bring the place a little bit more back to home. Now, we know that Quddús during the Mazandaran upheaval ended up with several hundred other Babis at the shrine of Sheikh Tarbarism. So Baha'is actually seldom mention who this Sheikh Tarbarism is. So I wanted to add that in. And Sheikh Tarbarism, this is the sacred shrine of Sheikh Tarbarism here, this white structured building. And there was a 7-month battle in inverted commas there. And after that time, as a result of the aspects of that battle led to the savage martyrdom of Quddús on the 16th of May, 1849. And the man of the Sheikh Tarbarism is actually Abu Ali Fazl ibn Hassan Tarbarism, or otherwise known as Sheikh Tarbarism. He's especially famous because he wrote a brilliant commentary on the Quran in Arabic, and it's called Majma' al-Bayan fi Tafsir al-Quran. And everybody should have a copy of that as far as their background deepening goes and becoming more aware of the Shi'i background to our faith. Here's a photograph of one of the printings of this. It's a nice, beautiful edition in, as you can see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10 volumes or so. So actually I added more than I should here, but there's a few more things about this figure. I won't say any more about that now, though. Just to say that he died in 1153 of the Common Era, 548 of the Muslim calendar. Abu Ali al-Tarbarism, Sheikh Tarbarism. Now back to Quddús and the Bab. One of the most fascinating things, and this is in the writings of the Bab in numerous places in subtle and deep ways, is that the name of the Bab was Ali Muhammad, and the name of Quddús was Muhammad Ali. And so even relative to their parentally bestowed name, they were kind of mirrors of each other. Quddús was the son of a humble rice farmer, as we said, who followed a clerical, often shaky, associated education in Baha'i, Mashhad, and Karbala in Iraq, where he studied with Sayyid Kazim Rashdi, as we mentioned. The two of them, Quddús and the Bab, formed a kind of mystical syzygy. I love that word, S-Y-Z-Y-G-Y. If you don't know that word, look it up and try to incorporate it into your vocabulary. It means a union of opposites, or a special union, though there are differing dimensions to the two. So while the Bab was the first point, the nukta of the letter B, Quddús is the last point, similar to the names being kind of reversing of each other. They were roughly the same age, though Quddús was a little younger by a few years. They were both young men at the time of that pilgrimage of 1844 to 5. Quddús also was at the conference of Badasht in 1848, and Shoghi Effendi has it that it was there that he had the title Quddús, as 81 of the other Babis, 9 times 9 is 81. And that's another numerical thing, which is typical of the Qajar era generation of historiographical and theological thinking. How many people should have been at the Badasht conference who received a tablet? Well, 9 times 9 is a good number. Whether we should take that too literally or not, people can make up their own minds, but it's taken that way and God passes by. And you see here that new names were given to people upon the last letter of the living was conferred the appellation of Quddús. But we shall see also that that word has a bearing upon Muhammad Ali Bafurushi Quddús earlier than the conference of Badasht. There are tablets which certainly suggest that. Now back to the philological materials, which the word Quddús, I put it in the diagram there in the Arabic with the definite article, but the word Quddús itself is formed from, is a triliteral Arabic root. In other words, the basic components of the word or the verb are Q, this is this one with the 2 dots, the D and the S. And the basic sense of it is separation, sanctity, and holiness, as we mentioned a few moments ago. Okay, it comes from a Semitic triliteral root of great antiquity. So, for example, Ruh al-Quddús in Quranic Arabic has to do with the Holy Spirit, or something which is most holy, is a masculine noun or adjective occurring only twice in the Quran. And the associated word Quddús occurs 4 times and is especially connected with Jesus Christ, the Galilean Messiah, and the related Holy Spirit. That's in the Quran itself. And the Quran has it that Jesus was confirmed by the Holy Spirit. Now, we'll bypass this later, but some of the early Babis saw Quddús as a kind of return of Jesus Christ, partly because of the theology associated with his name and person and his sanctity, and because there are Hadith in Islamic traditions which speak about the return of Christ at the same time as the return of the Prophet. And the relationship between the Bab and Quddús reminded them somewhat of the relationship between Muhammad and Jesus. So in the Dawnbreakers, the title Quddús is associated, given by Baha'u'llah at the Conference of Badr. But to just highlight the fact that there are differences of opinion about when this entitlement took place. Hassan Balyuzi, in his book, The Bab, indicates that the Bab conferred it upon Quddús. And we'll see later some of the passages which do indicate that. Both of these things may well be true in their own way. I'm sure they are. And we'll see 2 dimensions of that as we go on. Now, if we go into the philological aspects of the word Quddús, this man, one of the most brilliant Australian academics, probably of all time, wrote a book, The Foreign Vocabulary of the Quran. And in that book, his name was Arthur Jeffrey, died in 1952. And this is the page in which he deals with Quddús. And there, we don't have time to read it all, but suffice it to say, he underlines the fact that the word is not originally Arabic. It comes from it's a common Semitic word, but the philologists and Arab philologists give different derivations of this word. Some of them touching upon Ethiopic, which is that beautiful, interesting script there. And he also summarizes some of the Quranic material about that word. Now, this Hebrew verse of the Bible, Exodus 26:34, speaks about the Kaporet, the so-called mercy seat above the Ark of the Covenant in the Holy of Holies. Now, the word for the Holy of Holies, the most holy place in the world, according to the Bible, where the Jewish high priest was only permitted to go once a year on the Day of Atonement. It was that holy and sanctified. It's called Kodesh HaKodeshim, the sacred of the sacreds, or that's kind of superlative in Hebrew, the Holy of Holies. So QDS again come here. So that's the biblical basis of that. And in Greek, agion to agion, or agia agion, Holy of Holies, occurs in the book of Hebrews in the Bible. In Latin, sanctum sanctorum, Holy of Holies. And in the Arabic translation of the Bible by Cornelius van Allen van Dyck, published during the 1860s, this is the Bible quoted by Baha'u'llah, beloved of Abdul Baha. His translation is this: and you shall put the qiter, that's a kind of mercy seat, it's just a word meaning covering, upon the Tarbut Shahada, the Ark of the Testament or Covenant in Quddús al-Aqdas. That's the same phrase actually used by the Bab, or a similar phrase, in his Book of the Five Graves. So this will give you a tasting of the pre-Islamic background to the sanctity of this particular word. In the book of Isaiah, one of the most sacred and interesting books of the Hebrew prophets, we have there this particular phrase in Hebrew. It says, Vayakra ze el ze vayomer. That means, and someone recited to another one and said, Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh. Like Quddús, Quddús, Quddús. Yahweh Adonai Sabaoth, the Lord of hosts. Mala'a kol ha'eretz kavodem. The Lord of hosts, it will fill all of the earth with his, i.e. God's kavod. And the translation is there. The kavod is how you would translate the word Baha into biblical Hebrew if you wanted to do that, because some of the verses which refer to Baha'u'llah use that word kavod. So here we have not only the word Baha in Hebraic terms, but 3 occurrences of the word Quddús, and a verse of the Bible saying the whole earth is full of his kavod, his Baha. Again, an expression of how important and sanctified that word was. I wanted to digress here and say, this is my ticket to get into the Masjid al-Aqsa in what is now Palestine, Jerusalem. And that's my ticket to go into the Dome of the Rock. Now, why is the Dome of the Rock important in this connection? And the answer is that the temple, the Holy of Holies, was actually probably located adjacent or near that stone, which the Jews called the navel of the earth, the center of the cosmos and of the universe in Jerusalem. And there it was believed that the presence of God, the kavod, the Shekinah, appeared in order to sanctify Hebrew sacrifices and to be communicated with when appropriate, especially, as I said, by the Jewish high priest. So Sholet and I actually were within probably 10, 20 feet of the area originally known as the Holy of Holies. And we were very happy to have made that trip. And these are the rules of what you can and can't do when you're down there. Holy of Holies. Just in passing say that if you look in the Persian version of Abdul Baha's chapter 11 in Some Answered Questions, it's about the interpretation of the book of Revelation. And in there, there's some very fascinating things which Abdul Baha interpreted relative to the Holy of Holies and the person of Quddús. We've no time to go into details about that, but that's it. Now we're going to go back to the root QDS, sanctified or holy. Now we all know as Baha'is superlative forms of the Arabic. So Isme At-Zam, the greatest name, the At-Zam is the superlative of the triliteral root Ein Zama, At-Zam. Just as Akbar, and we've all heard that a billion times, Allahu Akbar, Akbar is the superlative, meaning God is the greatest or the especially important. And we know it from Al-Amna al-Aqdas, from the Bab's writings, because he changed in the name of God, the merciful, the compassionate, to in the name of God, Al-Amna al-Aqdas. Amna means something like away from, inviolate, apophatic, and Aqdas means supremely holy. So the Bab's theology changed the basmala from God being the merciful, the compassionate, to God being incomprehensible and abstracted and unknowable in his ultimacy. So the Akdas word, the Quddús related word, is also in that basmala. And I translated it, I think down here. So from two words meaning God's closeness and empathy with humanity, we come in the Baha'i realm to have an emphasis upon God's abstracted beyondness. And this is important to bear in mind when you're talking about divinity and people claiming or being accorded a title relative to divinity. Nobody generally is shocked these days when Christians say that they believe that Christ was God, and they don't usually just mean they're God in a secondary way, that they mean the actual Godhead. But for Babis and Baha'is, the word God is never a title appropriated by the manifestation of God, hence the word mazhar, manifestation, not the actual Godhead itself. So there's a lesson too there, and the same word from which the word for Quddús comes is in the new Babi Basmala. In the early days, the Bab used the standard Islamic one in his Tafsir Surah al-Baqarah, in the name of God, the merciful, the compassionate. But this changed in time. This is a progressive evolution. Bismillah ar-Rahman Rahim, Bismillah al-Amna al-Aqdas for the Bab, Bismillah al-Bahi al-Abha for Baha'is. Now, the Bab didn't always use that, and Baha'u'llah didn't always use this, because there are actually thousands of different variants of the recreated Islamic version, which has been the standard Quranic-based one for many centuries. So we're going to quickly move to Quran and Hadith. Quddús in the Quran, we touched on this earlier. He is God, no God is there except him, the King, Al-Quddús, the Most Holy. Another verse, 62:1, whatever is in heaven and on earth glorifies God, the King, Al-Quddús, the Most Holy. This reflects that verse of the Bible about the glorification and the presence of God in the Holy of Holies. And the Bab himself, in one of those 18 tablets to the letters of the living, or temples, which I read all this morning before I didn't have time for breakfast, begins, this is the one to the 11th letter, Mullah Abdul Jalil Urumi, and the Bab begins, he is, as usual, Bismillah al-Qa'im al-Quddús. So the Bab says, in the name of God, the Qa'im. Well, you say, okay, well, isn't Qa'im the title of the promised one? The answer is yes, it is. But the word Qa'im also appears in the Quran as an attribute of God. And sometimes the Bab uses it in this way likewise. So he was moved here to use the word Qa'im and then the word Quddús. And it's interesting to bear in mind that both of these terms are at different times related to Muhammad Ali Barfurushi, the most important disciple of the Bab. As an attribute of God, Quddús crops up again in important strings of divine attributes which the Bab uses. This is again an extract from his book of the 5 grades, sections 3.2 and 5.3. Both these strings occur there. And I will just point and translate as we go along a little bit. There's no doubt about you. Eternally you were Ilahan, a divine, a single divinity, one divinity, a Samad divinity, a Fard, unique divinity, alive, Qayyum, Sultan, sovereign, Muhaymin, help in peril, and then what? Quddús. So an attribute of God here has this string of divine attributes. So I put that there just to say Quddús is also a divine attribute, not only in the Quran a number of times, but in the writings of the Bab also. And we're going back now to Holy Spirit material in the Quran, and we already touched upon that. So now we go to names of God and Quddús's role in that respect. The most beautiful names is a Quranic phrase which occurs 4 times. And the most beautiful names includes various of the 99 names of God. God is supposed to have had 99 names, 100 less 1. And they begin God, Allah, Rahman, Rahim, Sabur, patient, is 99. But Quddús is number 6 among the 99 names of God, according to, here they all are, according to various Hadith. And in his book, the Book of the Index, the Bab also gives an important place to the name of God, Quddús. This has got a little bit out of place. And in the Qayyum al-Asma, in one of the surahs there, the Bab actually himself claims, and this is interesting, Innani anna al-Quddús. I am indeed am Quddús. I was about the Nair, the theophanic fire, fi in the Bahr al-Sabi, in the 7th ocean of paradise, al-Firdaus, Mashhuda. I was evident relative to that. So the Bab can claim to be Quddús in his first book, Surah 91, and there's some interesting allusions there. When the Bab wrote this, it's not entirely clear at this stage of research whether Quddús was with him, had been with him, or what. There is an interesting passages after this section of that surah of the Qayyum al-Asma, which could even relate to the servitude position of Quddús himself. Now, the Book of the Index, we can see here that the Bab says that God has 360 names, 12 times 30. And he lists 36 names. And you have here Rahman, Rahim, Malik, and then Quddús, of the 36 that he lists in that book. I'm going to scroll forwards because time is getting on. And there are many books about these most beautiful names of God. I suggest that you all buy them and study them in getting to terms with the vocabulary of the Baha'i scriptures. The most beautiful names of God is in the Bab's book, The 7 Proofs, Al-Asma al-Husna, most beautiful names. The Bab says in this Arabic 7 Proofs, with him, i.e. God, are the Asma al-Husna from the past and from times thereafter. Now, it wasn't only the Bab, but Baha'u'llah himself in the Rizwan al-Adl tablet states, we made him, i.e. Baha'u'llah, to be a son among the sons of our most beautiful names. So back to the tablet itself. Shola reminded me I have to move on. And we already spoke a little bit about this word marhub, having to do with Quddús's deep piety and asceticism. And the tablet itself begins with a huwa statement. And then the basmala form here is an interesting one. In the name of God, the most eternal, I put pre-eternal, but we're not quite sure how to translate that because in ordinary Arabic, izul doesn't seem to exist. So it has something to do with eternity. In the name of God, al-abad, that means the eternal. And azal has to do with pre-eternity or the ancient eternity-ness of God, or whoever is being spoken about in this particular tablet. And you'll notice that the Bab does strange things with words sometimes, so that this is the tablet to Tahiri, the 17th Haykal. And at the end of that, and you remember the prescript we spoke about earlier, the Bab refers to God as Al-Aziz, Al-Izuz, a non-existent word there following the same pattern of Izul after the form Azal. So in Haykal 2, to Mullah Hassan Bushrui, this is Muhammad Afnan's handwriting here. And you have here Bismillah al-Azal al-Izul, if that's the right pointing. Now, going back to the monastic side of things a little bit, the reason why I think that word marhul can have to do with the sanctity of Quddús is because, for example, the word occurs in the Qayyim. Quddús occurs once in the Qayyim al-Asma. We already spoke about that. But this word rahban and associated terms is also found, but not very frequently. By the name of Joseph, God intended our exalted word, Kalimat al-Akbar. That's one of the titles that the Bab gave to himself, made manifest in the vicinity of the theophanic fire, like the fire of the burning bush where God appeared. Then the Bab continues to speak further, referring to probably an individual, perhaps himself, as one awesome monastic God-fearing, object of admonition for such as might be mindful or fearful of the All-Merciful. So this is the first paragraph of the Tablet to Quddús, a book from the letter Affair, which is an abbreviated way of saying Thamara, which is one of the titles of the Bab, meaning the fruit of the tree of reality and divinity, unto the 18th temple. I bear witness that he, no God is there except him, the king, al-Quddús. You see, so the word Quddús does come in this particular tablet here. He is the one who commissioned among the Persians a youth, al-Ajamiyin. Ajami means loose, on basic level, it means a non-Arab, hence often is used of a Persian. And the Bab often called himself al-Ajami. And here, it almost certainly means a Persian. So he commissioned, as commissioned to prophethood or having a message among the Persians, fi ajamiyin sabi'an, a youth, the Bab or perhaps Quddús himself, to the end that he might fill the pillars of all things, arkan kulli shay, with, i.e. the announcement, verily he is God, no God is there except I myself, for all should be aware of myself, and I verily I am God, innani ana Allah, no God is there except I myself. Very interesting, a very clear claim to divinity there. Either you can take it referring to the Bab himself and or Quddús, whether, and this is how I initially understand it, but that's probably wrong, that this had dual connotations and it may not. But having said that, we'll come back to that in a moment. The next sentence in the tablet says this claim to divinity, this before any before relative to the very essences of antecedents or beforeness, as well as after the after within the very essences of futurity. Min ba'da fi zaratul ba'da. So that's what the Bab says there. The interesting point about this is there's a very interesting line towards the beginning of the book of Al-Halaj called Kitab Tawasim, T and the S, which echoes that statement of the Bab. There's no time to go into that. The next thing the Bab says in paragraph 2 is Ali before the quadruple configuration. So quadruple means having to do with 4, forness, or ba. So why for? Ali before, we know that the Bab's name is Ali Muhammad, but the Bab here happens to say Ali before the fourfold, M1, H2, M3 again, and D4. So Ali before Muhammad is the manifestation of myself. So in other words, the Bab himself is the nafs, or the self. Now the word nafs has exalted theological connotations and can mean the substance, the person, the reality, the logos nature of the Godhead. So the Bab saying, Ali Muhammad, myself, is the manifestation of the divinity, while the 18th letter is even as mine own self, li nafsihi. At my command, as a result of my command, all derive existence. I verily am God, no God is there except I myself. Whatsoever is other than me is my creation. So again, we have here, as we indicated earlier, this utterance of divinity associated with the Bab and perhaps spilling over into the person of Quddús also. And it's important to bear in mind why in so many of his writings, the Bab claims divinity. And the simple answer to that is that the day of resurrection, the time of the Bab, the era of the Bab, is the Yom Allah, the day of God. Now, for Baha'is, that doesn't mean that God's going to come down as we indicated, but it means that somehow God is going to be present on earth. So is it not appropriate that the Bab and his major mouthpiece, Quddús, should have the job of uttering the divine statement, I am God? In other words, I are celebrating the appearance of the day of God on earth. The Bab then goes on to say, actually I forgot to say here, that in his Arabic bayan, the Bab begins, the very beginning of the Arabic bayan, unlike the Persian one, the Arabic one begins with the Bab saying, I verily I am God, all should worship me, serve me as part of my creation. And that is echoed in this last line of paragraph 2 in the tablet of Quddús. So going forward again, the Bab here makes it clear that God didn't instruct, didn't create things so that people could play around, be a plaything. This word here, bath, is a Quranic item of vocabulary. It means a plaything, a sport. People or God don't play games, they don't sport about. But it's important to be serious because this is the liqa, the day of the encounter. This is the meeting with the manifestation of mine own, i.e. logos self. Lega, leper, mazhar nafsi. But for a very few, the Bab adds, none among you shall be understanding or have comprehension. So although the meeting with God has happened on earth, relative to coming in contact with the Bab or with those who voice the claim on his behalf, most people don't get it. So they're not aware of that. And that point is made in the 3rd paragraph. 4th paragraph, you can quickly read it from there, again, uttering of glorification and celebration of the manifestation of his divine self. And then the Bab says, nothing should remain veiled, for all should show piety before me, since I was thy Lord before time as well as hereafter. I am indeed God, the mighty, the beloved. 6th paragraph. This booklet or tablet of the Bab contains verses, divinely revealed verses, ayat, from myself unto the letter Athar, to the end that all may bear witness that he is my servant. So now the servitude dimension of things comes in. There's a close connection in Baha'i sacred writings between utter servitude and divinity, reflecting divinity. So it's said that true claims to servitude is a kind of claim to divinity if it's sincere and full. So this theological statement is brought into play here. So now the Bab says, I did cast into his inmost heart such expository verses as I, i.e. Quddús, am indeed God, the ruler, the mighty. I am indeed God, no God is there except I myself. I created everything through my command, for I am indeed the foreordainer. And here you have an unusual, I got it, unusual QDS configuration, which I've loosely translated sanctified. Quddús doesn't really crop up very much in, if at all, in Arabic. And the last paragraph of the tablet of the Bab to Quddús says, nothing can compare to mine own inimitability. So in other words, nobody can echo his uniqueness as a divine manifestation within the divine realm, Lahut, within the omnipotent domain, Jabarut, of everything. I am the omnipotent ordainer, the supremely great. Yet of a certainty, thou, probably Quddús, art indeed God, no God is there except thee, the supremely powerful Lord, the one of talismanic potency. Now, Quddús here mirrors or echoes the divinity of the Bab, and they're both given this great, great power. But an interesting thing here, what I've translated, the one of talismanic potency, is the 2468, the letters B, D, W, and hard H, Badu or Bidu, or however you want to point that. There's no definite way. But it's a way of saying that whoever has this title sums up the potency expressed in a magic square type configuration, which has the number 5 as its heart, and which spells the number 15 vertically, horizontally, and diagonally. And so this is applied here to Quddús as an interesting way of talking about the magical, amazing power of Quddús. But this morning I learned, when I quickly read those tablets to all of the letters of the living, but it occurs 3 times in them, as printed in the Dawnbreaker's text. In the 1 to the 11th letter of the living, Wala Abdul Jalil Urumi contains this line: there is no God except him, Mutta Aziz al-Badu. So you see that word cropping up relative to God himself there. And there's another reference to, in the one for the 19th Haykal, this is the Bab himself. So the one of the tablets of the Bab to the Bab himself as the confluence of the Haykal, Majma' al-Hayakil. That's how the Bab's referring to himself in the beginning of that. The confluence of the temples, hence their oneness, hence the Bab's cry of divinity. In his absence in Azerbaijan, Marku and Shehri, he gives to certain of his special disciples, and I should have that included, Tahireh and Quddús, the right to make statements about the divinity pertinent to themselves. And Abdul Baha, one of his tablets, has stated that Quddús's commentary on the letter Sad of Samad is full of statements of Innani Annallah, I am God, or that effect. So anyway, in this 19th tablet here, it says, he is, i.e. God, in the name of God, the living one, Al-Hay, so you have that there again, the might generating, mustaziz, the I put a B there instead of a probably I or an A there. I can change that right now, easy enough. Whoops, caps lock is on. The near one. So this is the basmala formula in the 19th one. So all of these fascinating things are just a taster of some of the wonders of this particular tablet of the Bab. And there's much more to be said about almost every word and subject that I mentioned. Some of it is on my website under where I cite and translate the whole of this tablet. But because I did so much work today in updating it and reminding my brain of what was in all of those other tablets, it all has to be rewritten a bit. So what's on my website now, in a week's time, will be different. So, but I have to move from my PowerPoint presentation, some of the stuff up to the website page. And I should add here now that nothing that's on my website is authoritative or authentic or necessarily correct. The same goes with this PowerPoint presentation. It's just my humble attempt to delight in and share something, a limited aspect of these wonderful aspects of the writings of the Bab. Thank you so much for coming and being so patient.
Thank you so much. If the friends could please go ahead and unmute themselves, or actually use the raise your hand feature. And then Dr. Lambden, can you stop sharing the screen so we can see the friends?
Yes, I will. Don't delete that.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Lambden. That was so enlightening. And after your presentation, I feel that I'm probably like the early Babis who thought it was Quddús, him whom God shall make manifest, after your presentation. So it was probably easy that the Babis thought that.
Yes.
Okay, so we have the raise your hand feature. We're going to go with Bijan. Bijan, please unmute yourself and ask your question or comment.
I just have a question on the date. Dr. Lambden, I believe if I understood you correctly, you mentioned that at the date that this particular tablet was revealed to Quddús is not known. And my understanding was from the Tarikh Nabil that basically that the Bab, before he took his pilgrimage with Quddús, he gave all the letters of living one tablet, including the Mullah Hussein Bushuye Babul Bab, and also gave him the tablet to take to Baha'u'llah. So isn't this tablet the one that was revealed by Bab to Quddús at the time prior to pilgrimage to Mecca?
Well, I think it may be, but that's an assumption which needs confirmation relative to the style and language within the tablets themselves. And at the moment, detailed aspects of the dating of that tablet are controversial. You have some items of vocabulary within there which are not only not typical of many of the Bab's writings, but some of them would suggest a later date than just after he declared his mission or something in even the first year or two. That may well be the case. But I think at this stage, everybody can make up their own mind and be as confident as they like about that. But my own position is I'm uncertain about various aspects of these texts and about their dating, and to some degree, well, I don't want to go into details. So I acknowledge that what you say is quite correct and worthwhile and valid. And my answer is, I really don't know, not sure. Thank you for the question.
a question about the 99 names of God, because wasn't it supposed to actually be 100, and the 100th name, which was considered the greatest name, was going to be revealed on the day of judgment?
Well, again, it's a matter of diverse people having diverse opinions about this, but the Hadith from the Prophet says God has 100 names less one. So the Prophet is reckoned to have said 99, or he didn't say anything about the 100th name. And that Baha'is might understand the word Baha, which is not one of those 99 names and never has been in Islamic religion, then that's our supplementary theological position. And so there are 99 names, 100 less one. There's another hadith in which Muhammad is alleged to have said that God loves the odd. And one of the names of God in some Islamic configurations is Watr or Witr, which means the odd one. And so oddness is not something which Islamic theology is bothered about. It quite likes 99 and there being one missing. And number one in the Islamic scheme is Allah, which is also the greatest name for them. So when we say the greatest name, and Baha'u'llah also repeats that in various of his tablets, our saying the 100th is the greatest name is like saying we believe that there's a supplementary one which we could call number 100, and that is the name of God, Al-Baha. Okay, thank you for your interesting question. It made my brain work a bit harder. Yeah.